Any minute. Okay. We are live. Okay. Welcome to Sagas and Sass Season 2. I'm Tara, along with fellow hosts Nick, Jonathan, and Nami.
This episode will cover His Majesty's Dragon, Book 1 of the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik.
If you're watching live, join us in the chat, or after the fact, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sagas and Sass to continue the conversation.
And just a reminder, the views expressed in this show are those of the hosts as individuals and do not necessarily represent the show as a whole.
Okay, so we are back with an all-new series, y'all. We're kicking off Season 2 with the Temeraire saga by Naomi Novik, and the first book we're covering is His Majesty's Dragon. It's basically the Napoleonic War, but with dragons. The story opens with the HMS Reliant capturing a French vessel called the Amity. The Reliant's captain, William Lawrence, is alerted to the fact that there's a dragon's egg in the hold and it is nearly ready to hatch. To prevent the dragon from going feral, they hastily make up a harness and assign a member of the crew to become its rider. But when the egg hatches, the dragon ignores that random crew member and chooses Lawrence instead. He names the young dragon Temeraire after a ship he remembers from his past. Lawrence is initially unhappy at the thought of being bound to Temeraire, as the men who fly dragons largely live outside of society and spend all of their time caring for their dragons. But by the time the Reliant reaches Britain, Lawrence has become fond of Temeraire. Once on land, Sir Edward Howe, an expert in dragon breeds, identifies Temeraire as a Chinese imperial dragon. This comes as a shock because not only are the Chinese known for their expertise in breeding dragons, but an imperial has never been seen outside of China. Meanwhile, members of Britain's Air Force arrive with a trained rider to replace Lawrence. But Temeraire tells the rider to fuck off because he loves Lawrence.
So Lawrence and Temeraire are sent to the Loch Lagan covert, where dragons are trained. On the way there, Lawrence visits his family in Nottinghamshire, where his father, Lord Allendale, tells Lawrence he's a disgrace and to stay away from them so as not to draw unnecessary attention. And on top of that, his childhood sweetheart, Edith, tells him she can't consider a formal relationship with him. Oof, that's rough, buddy. When Lawrence and Temeraire finally reach Loch Lagan, they begin to prepare for training with the other dragons. Lawrence becomes acquainted with some of the riders at the covert and is initially shocked to discover that many of the members of Britain's Royal Air Force are women. Gasp! The reason for this is that Longwings, acid-spitting dragons that are the most deadly dragons in Britain, will only consent to having female riders, and as such, women are trained as aviators. Initially, Lawrence is an outcast among the aviators and gets off on entirely the wrong foot with a man named John Granby, who is assigned to his crew despite being a friend of the rider who was rejected by Temeraire. But then Lawrence proves himself to the other aviators, Granby included, by helping rescue a wounded dragon named Victoria.
Time passes, training continues. We insert a lovely training montage here, maybe with some final countdown or you're the best around, something along those lines. Anyway, Temeraire reaches maturity. His appearance changes along the way. He grows a ruff around his head and tendrils on his jaw. Stay tuned because that becomes important later. Temeraire's training buddy is Maximus, a regal copper who is assigned to a big, blustering man named Berkeley. They are part of a formation that will protect a Longwing named Lily, ridden by a young woman named Harcourt. The dragons and their riders become good friends, and all three captains love their dragons, as generally every rider does, with the exception of Jeremy Rankin, who views his dragon Levitas as little more than a talking beast and ignores him to the point of abuse, though poor Levitas clearly loves Rankin and wants nothing more than his approval. Unfortunately, only the dragon can choose whether or not they will leave their rider, so nothing can be done to stop this. But Lawrence is big mad about it.
One day, a French royalist, and I will absolutely be butchering this, Choiseul, who fled during the French Revolution, shows up and joins their formation. Not long after this, the riders are informed that they are being moved to the Dover covert so they can aid in the war. Once there, Lawrence meets and eventually hooks up with Jane Rowland, high-ranking rider of a dragon called Excidium and mother of Emily Rowland, the young girl who is part of Temeraire's crew. Their initial battle achieves little more than driving the French away, and Lily is brutally injured by one of the French dragons. Harcourt, if you recall, Lily's captain, exhausts herself caring for Lily, and Choiseul offers to assist her. But then, one night, Lawrence hears a commotion coming from Lily's clearing and goes to investigate, only to find Choiseul attempting to kidnap Harcourt. Sorry, I almost choked there. Brief struggle ensues, and Choiseul is apprehended and taken away. Turns out he was a French spy sent back to steal Temeraire, who was meant for none other than Napoleon himself. So Choiseul is executed for treason, and his aggrieved dragon is sent to a breeding ground. Temeraire, Maximus, and Lily are all filled with sorrow for him and fear for their own riders, so they plan to help each other if their riders are sentenced to death, should the situation ever arise. News of the success at Trafalgar reaches the convert, and Rankin arrives with an urgent message. Napoleon is planning another assault, in which dragons will carry wooden transports filled with men directly to England. Although his steady work has aided Britain, it has come at the cost of Levitas, who is dying. At first, Rankin is nowhere to be found, and Holland, Lawrence's ground crew master, who has secretly been caring for Levitas behind Rankin's back, is cradling the dying dragon. Upon discovering this, Lawrence drags Rankin to Levitas and forces him to say a few nice words as the dragon expires. Rankin can go die in a hole. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Lawrence later hears that an egg is nearly ready to hatch nearby. To prevent Rankin from being assigned to the egg, Lawrence recommends Holland.
All right. Now, Napoleon's invasion begins with the French dragons overwhelming the English dragons while the transports land and the soldiers begin the offense. But Temeraire and Lawrence realize that they're probably beaten, and they still resolve to try their best until the battle is lost. As he prepares to attack a transport, Temeraire roars at it, and as he does so, the tendrils and ruff on his neck flare, and he emits a sort of sonic blast. The transport basically falls apart midair. This not only comes as a surprise to Temeraire and Lawrence, but it causes confusion in the French ranks, and the British manage to repel them. Now, during the victory celebrations, Lawrence runs into Sir Edward Howe, who's heard about Temeraire's unusual attack in the battle, and tells Lawrence that he misidentified the breed because he observed him before he reached maturity. Temeraire is actually a celestial, which is the most valuable Chinese dragon breed, normally reserved for emperors, and they have the ability known as the divine wind, which allows him to bring down enemies through the strength of his roar. Now, Howe also warns Lawrence that once word gets out, the Chinese are probably going to come back and try to reclaim Temeraire, but Lawrence isn't concerned about this, and he and Temeraire return to the celebrations, and that wraps up our summary of His Majesty's Dragon. So this was such a big change from the last series that we did. These books took a little bit to get into for me, and just a forewarning, I won't spoil anything, but I am 3 books into the series now. So I have gotten a little bit ahead, and thankfully I did enjoy the second and third ones quite a bit more. This one, it had like the beginning was really good. Then it was really slow for a while for me. Then it kind of like picked up a little bit. And like, I enjoyed like the battle stuff, and finding out that Temeraire has this like crazy power at the end.
It's, to me, the funniest thing about this book was that I had honestly forgotten that so much happens in it. It wasn't until like reading the summary right now that I was like, oh yeah, wait, that did happen. That did happen. That did happen. It was all in the same book. And it's really weird because it's such a dense book that somehow manages to feel incredibly slow at the same time. And I'm not quite able to put those two together. Just as an aside, by the way, this is, very much related to this, but I've also been reading a lot more on my own, and I've been more generous with myself in not finishing books if I am not clicking with them right away. And to be completely honest, this is one of the books that I would have not finished if it wasn't for this series. And I'm glad I stuck with it, because by the end I ended up liking Lawrence more, although going from apathetic to kind of liking is not great, but like I wasn't apathetic to him anymore, and I liked I didn't anticipate the twist of Temeraire being a celestial, because in reading the summary it seems kind of obvious that would happen, but like the way it's presented in the story is really well done in a way that it's like, oh, he's definitely an imperial, like this is it, I'm absolutely certain. And like, just with a lot of books that are like the twist to be like, oh, you're the almost most powerful, oh no, but you are the most powerful, it's usually very obvious to see it coming. And for some reason I didn't see it with this, maybe because I was so kind of like disconnected with how long it was that I was like, maybe forgetting that Celestials were a thing. I don't know. I rambled again. Hi guys, I'm back. Did you miss me?
Yes.
So much.
Yeah, I mean, I rarely put a book down and never finish it. So it's for me, it wasn't, and honestly, when it did get slow, it was more about, it wasn't necessarily this, like I the thing is, I love Temeraire and I love a lot of the side characters, you know, like Berkeley and Maximus are great, and like you know, Cat, like Harcourt and Lily I like a lot. Harcourt is just kind of there right now. I'm hoping she plays a bigger part like later in the series, but like you know, Lawrence is insufferable, to be honest. I did not I like Nami, I didn't even get to the point at the end of this one where I liked him a lot more. Like I liked him a little bit more, but I still am like,
I think the only reason I liked him is because of the maturity that he shows upon reflecting with the situation with Edith. So Edith is like the woman who they basically had an understanding that they would get married, and like he gets really angry at her and he's like how dare you, like fine, I guess, like if you don't want to honor our agreement, like fine. And she basically turns to him and she's like, hey, listen, like I still care about you deeply and I would marry you, but you've gone and fucked yourself and you've gone and fucked my future life opportunities, so I can't marry you. I would basically be living in the middle of nowhere. That is not a life for a person, so I can't, even though I love you. Like you can't expect that from me. And at first his response is like, you know, like self-defensive, salty. And as it goes on later on, he like realizes, and like she gets engaged to somebody else and he's like, okay, you know, like that, like this was the right thing. Like I couldn't have made her live this life. Like she was right to reject me like that. And she was right to be upset about it. And I'm like, huh, that was not growth I expected from him, because he is literally boring McBoring face. I have been calling him boring McBoring face the whole time I've been reading. Like, no offense, I get where this character is coming from, because if you look at Naomi Novik's like talking about, like she, like I read like her afterword in the book where it's like about her, and she basically wrote this book because she likes historical stories and she likes history and she likes dragons and she also likes Jane Austen novels. So this is essentially like a Regency story. And so like he's basically like literally Mr. Darcy when he's still got a stick up his butt, and like this is the whole story from Mr. Darcy's point of view, except Mr. Darcy does not loosen that stick from up his butt, and he also is placing that butt upon a dragon. And I think like it's just that every single time he was like, oh my god, a woman, oh my god, he doesn't have manners. I was just like, dude, can you like take 17 chill pills? And then he's like, they didn't call me sir, I am offended. I was just like,
I think his shock about like the women and his like he's faster to come to terms with it than I expected based on the rest of his character. But like his shock about the women wasn't even like, it was like, okay, you know, I get it. Like that's that time period, whatever. It was more his like constant just like schnan about like how the other aviators had no manners and no breeding and upbringing. And I mean, I don't know, like I kind of want to know, Nick and Jonathan, as you know, what you guys thought of him, because like, you know, obviously Nami and I are coming from a more, you know, girl's perspective.
I spent the entire first half of the book picturing him as runner-up in Fawlty Towers Upper Class Twit of the Year Awards.
Jonathan, you made me choke on my falafel.
Sorry.
Worth it.
Yeah, I agree. He's an insufferable ass. The only saving grace is he's clearly a very competent military man, as opposed to some of those normal winners are complete incompetence. So he had that going for him. I also thought his adjustment was because he's such a competent military leader that he could adapt to on the fly to changing circumstances better than another person thrust into that. That he had enough adaptability in his makeup that okay, you know, we have the way a British upper class sailor is supposed to behave, but this is a different circumstance and I have to adapt. And oh, there are women, and yes, it makes sense there are women, and I'm going to have to adapt to that. So I thought he was adaptable, but yeah, he's not the most exciting character at least through the first book that of every series, and I don't think there was not enough even internally monologues that I found really interesting.
Yeah.
I just thought it was dull. His discussions with Temeraire were better, and his love for Temeraire came very quick, and I almost thought it was romantic in some ways, because he kept calling him dear, which I thought was interesting, and that was a little odd. But Nick, go ahead, fill us in with your.
Oh,
you're muted.
Nick, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm
There
right.
you go.
Right, my dog was barking, so I didn't want to have that come through. I did not get the whole romantic thing. For me, it was more like a paternal kind of relationship. And I think that clicks more for me. Maybe I'm just not a dragon fucker. I don't know. I'll have to read more books to discover.
I'm sure there's some fan fiction of that somewhere.
No,
oh God, please no.
Think you'd have to go very far.
Yeah, I know it exists, and I do not want.
I mean, to me, this was like a very obvious first book. I think it was well done. I've actually read some of Naomi Novik's other books in a different series that I liked a lot, and there's a very different feel to these, but I still enjoyed them. And like everybody else, I mostly enjoyed the dragons and the side characters. I really liked Jane a lot. I thought she was a lot of fun. And those are what made the book really enjoyable for me. As usual, I listened to mine on audio book version. So that was also a little bit different, which was nice. Sadly, it was not one where they had different voices, but it wouldn't really have made sense in this case because it's really just the one narrator that we're dealing with throughout the entire book. But yeah, I mean, overall, I enjoyed it. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this book, but it was a lot of fun, and I definitely love the dragons.
Yeah, I mean, they're the best part, and like, I feel like if it weren't for Temeraire, I probably would have just put this book down if I wasn't reading it for a webcast. And I'm glad, and I get obviously what Nami is saying, and Jonathan, what you're saying as well. Like, I get why Lawrence is written the way he's written, but like in that case, like I feel like, oh come on, I wanted more of Berkeley. I wanted more. I want to learn a little bit more about Captain Harcourt. I really also enjoyed Jane Rowland as well. I mean, and even Granby and Holland is so good. Holland's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Like his reward for, I mean, he falls in love, like in that, like not romantic, but he falls in love a little bit with Levitas, like as he's taking care of him. And it's kind of unrequited though, because Levitas is still obsessed with Rankin. And
what? No one wants to get in a Rankin's head?
No, I don't think so.
I would like to stab Rankin a lot.
I would like to open his head.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so I'm glad that in the end, like Holland gets like a little reward for, being a good dude, overall. And yeah, I just, there's so much more to it that made me just kind of like, okay, like I I want to know more about the world, honestly, too. Like the why do the French, like, because they touch a little bit on why the French have certain types of dragons and why the British have certain types of dragons, and they there's brief mentions of other countries and stuff, and they have different types of dragons. Like, I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever get to this point, but there's 9 books in the series. Like, I would imagine, like, do they get to like the War of 1812 and we get to see like American dragons? Because I want to see some American dragons, but
so no spoilers, but I have like read like the back of the book summaries essentially for all the books just because I couldn't help myself. But it does look like we travel the world in this series, and that we will get like dragons from around the world as well. I don't know if that specifically includes American dragons, but I know for sure we're going to get Chinese while in China, and I know we're definitely getting Australian as well, maybe, and I think South American. So I'm tentatively interested. And I think that was the big thing for me with this book. It's definitely not a book I normally would have continued with, and it actually has been on my bookshelf for about 10 years, and I just never read it because I'm not a war book person. I am not a historical book person, and even with dragons, I couldn't really convince myself that it was my cup of tea, and truthfully it wasn't, but I'm happy I stuck with it because the world building is really, really good. Like, as much as I don't really care about Lawrence, the world that Naomi Novik has built around him is intriguing enough that I'm like, I'll put up with this boring man to understand what's going on in this world.
I haven't read any of the other back blurbs on books or any of the wiki on this, but I don't know. I'm trying to put together how this world ends up there with a world in which China has dragons and these folks have dragons, and how we're basically in the same world except everyone has dragons. I just don't see how that happens.
Well, I think that's kind of like that's touched on some in this book for sure, because they talk about how the Chinese, they keep their information so close. Like, even the expert on dragon breeds has very little knowledge of the Chinese breeds. He only knows kind of like the basic like public information. And we know that China, the British are in China at this point and everything, but I think that's kind of part of this, is that it is based on the real world, but the dragons have like allowed for there to be changes. Like, that China isn't quite as open, I think, to other countries as they were forced to be in the real world.
Sorry,
that's what I don't get. I mean, it seems like there's no, at least based on the first book, it doesn't seem like there's any real change in the balance of power.
Right.
Which I think really having dragons of different varieties and different types and different strengths would have changed the balance of power.
Well, and I think that's because, well, really, like, that's the thing, because they all have dragons. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I mean, think about World War I, even, like, and even World War II. Like, the reason these wars went on for years and years is because, like, no one ever really had that, until the atomic bomb, really, nobody ever had that big of a leg up on another, country in terms of technology. So, like, one would have this little leg up and one would have this little leg up, but it was, you know what I mean? It was always, like, in this case, like, Napoleon has his genius, because Napoleon was in fact a genius in terms of military strategy, and he has dragons, but Britain has dragons too. They, like, the French have what are they called? Fleur de nuit, the ones that can see at night. But then the British have the acid spitting ones. So I feel like, I'm guessing there's going to be more explanation as we get to know, more of this world. But in this particular case, it just kind of feels like the fight is going on fairly similar to the way it would, it did historically, because the balance of power is still the same balance, because they all have similar, things that they're
So I think a really, like, the one thing that I was sort of super fixated on in this book, because I am a geneticist, is, you know, sort of like the breeding of these dragons, and how if you read like that section at the back of the book in so it's like basically like an excerpt of that British dragon experts journal, and basically you like read about like the historical like breeding of these dragons. And so the way I was reading it in my head is, this is exactly what it says on the cover. The world is unchanged, except there were dragons everywhere. And in the process of having dragons everywhere, the countries that had, you know, the resources to take advantage of these dragons did. And by taking advantage of them, they bred them for power. And so, you know, just like any other resource, powerful countries had the ability to mine the resource essentially, and to sort of, you know, exploit the resource. So in the sense that, you know, countries like Britain and like France and China had the ability to breed these dragons and get more and more powerful dragons. And that's why now you have, you know, the Imperials and the Celestials in China, and you have the Longwings and the Golden whatever Maximus is. Golden Royal Gold, I think. And so to me, it kind of read like that. So the way
Regal Copper, wasn't he?
Regal Copper.
Regal Copper.
Royal Gold also works. I mean, it's a color and a word that also means royal.
Yeah, I think that's the type of apple I'm eating at the moment.
Apples, dragons, same thing, right? But yeah, so that was the way I was imagining it in my head, because, you know, obviously this is, you know, from a biological and evolutionary standpoint, it seems that these dragons have been around for a while. And it goes to reason that when these dragons like first existed, like there wasn't like a super all-powerful dragon that was just born in one place conveniently, unless also that happened and we're going to find out about it later. I don't know, man. What's Naomi going to do? Beats me. But like, that is like the way I was rationalizing it in my head. But also, yeah, you're right. Like dragons, you think the change would be bigger, right? But I think another part of it is also that like, it's very much seems like the opinion of aviators is very shitty in this world, which I found very odd. Like, I just thought that whole dynamic that like people were just like, ew, aviators and ew, dragons. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that's cool as shit.
Yeah, I feel like if they've been part of the military as long as they supposedly have, like why are people not used to them yet? Like, I get it if it was like, they talked about how Britain had these little wild dragons, hundreds of years ago, and it took like interbreeding. They didn't really have a really great dragon breed of their own, except for maybe the Longwings. It took a lot of interbreeding, or maybe the Longwings were interbred. I can't remember.
The Longwings were interbred.
Okay, so but the dragons always existed, and they've been part of the military for a long time. So like, why is everybody still? Well, and honestly, though, I think that's really in a way historically accurate, right? It's a sign of the times. Like it's something people they're still not familiar enough with it, so they are like, no, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to see this in my life. This is weird. Whatever.
Yeah, the question is, how long have they been around? Because I know in the military there's often been scorn on military officers who have thought had more forethought. I mean, Patton was criticized a little early for his wanting to adapt tanks and trying, proving that tank warfare was the way to go. Billy Mitchell had issues when he tried to explain that air power was the future and they weren't using air power right, and the old days of battleships were done, and until Pearl Harbor, which proved him completely right, although he was on our side trying to convince our military of that earlier. So I get that, but if they've been around for a while, you shouldn't have that issue. They should have. So I'm not. The only thing I can think of is the sexism and the fact that we want to hide the fact that these aviators exist at all, because then we have to admit that there are women who are flying combat for us.
I think that's a very small part of it. I think it's a part of it, but I don't think it's a big part.
The more I think about it, the more that might be a bigger thing, because it's also like a lot of their secrecy was also in part of like hiding the intelligence of dragons too. Because, like, you know that, like, Rankin, Lawrence has that whole moment where he's like, oh my god, a dragon is our sensei. What's going on? And then he's like, oh my god, no wonder all the aviators got upset when they were like, let's murder dragons that don't have handlers. Like, they're smart. Oh, we can't do that. That's like murder. And then, like, you know, that whole thing. And I think, you know, it does make sense because the long wings are specifically, like, they are the, like, attack mob. Essentially.
Yeah, they're the elite, really. Like, you've got the giant regal coppers, but the longwings are the elite.
Yeah, they're like the most important ones, and it seems, you know, we're in the Regency era. Like these ladies can't show their ankles, much less converse with men while wearing breeches, for God's sakes.
How dare.
Also, because of my whole Regency obsession and like parallel to this, another way that I really got into the book was by imagining everybody like in period fashion for it for me. So like this whole time I was just thinking Regency dandies on dragons, and that is just all I have in my head. And I would like to cosplay Jane or Lily because I just want to dress as a Regency dandy and then be like, hey, I'm a dragon rider.
I think I need to be Jane and you need to be Harcourt.
Yeah, probably. Let's do it.
Always to cosplay. So Nick, I don't know, like you haven't said much for a bit, but I'm curious, like whether or not you have any take on why they keep this whole thing like keep it secret, keep it safe.
Well, I mean,
part of Lord of the Rings right now too. So
part of it is society, right? So, you know, like Nami was saying, we're setting this in roughly the Regency era. We know that the aviators are basically these like outcasts from society because they have to give so much attention to their dragons. As much as I love the idea of, you know, dandies riding around on dragons, they're described as basically, you know, not barely dressed, but like all their clothes are a mess. You know, they're described as being kind of disreputable. They're always going off to visit whorehouses and bars and things. And part of that is out of necessity, right? Because they can't have marriages, they can't have these sort of normal lives. But I think that is why they are kept separate from a society standpoint, right? Because if we're in the Regency era, the society is not going to want to be even really acknowledging, let alone associating with people of that sort.
That sort. I'm picturing like a fancy old lady with like really gray hair drinking tea with her pinky out and just be like, we don't associate with that sort of people.
Indeed.
And just a random kind of side note, I know Nick, you said you haven't, but I'm guessing Nami hasn't. Jonathan, I don't, by chance you haven't read the Aubrey Martin. Sorry,
I read the first book many years ago, and I have seen the movie.
Okay, so one of the things
you're talking about Master and Commander, right?
Yeah. So one of the things I posted, there's actually a Temeraire subreddit. There's a lot of very kind people in there, but like one person did comment saying like, this is the type of thing I'd like to see or hear about, you know, if you know, in a webcast or whatever that talks about this series. And they mentioned the Aubrey Maturin series, which begins with Master and Commander, which is this, you know, I was guessing, but you just confirmed it. It's the movie by the same name with Russell Crowe, right? It was based on it. Yes. I might have seen the movie. If I did, I don't remember anything about it. I don't know why, but yeah, I generally like war movies, so I don't know why I don't remember anything. I'm guessing I saw it, but I haven't read the books. But the blurb about the series as a whole is that it's, you know, they're nautical historical novels, which in a way this is nautical. And I will say that they do go back on ships in the future, at least in one of the books. And they're set during the Napoleonic Wars, and they center on the friendship of a captain of the Royal Navy and a ship's surgeon. So obviously not quite the same, but the guy's a physician, but he's also a philosopher and an intelligence agent. And that does, that does feel very like Lawrence and Temeraire. Just the description alone feels very Lawrence and Temeraire to me. I can see that Naomi Novik might have gotten, some inspiration from that series, and in at least in the relationship between, the staunch, Navy captain and somebody who is a little bit more, just wanting to be well read and taught and everything. I mean, and actually that's one thing I will say about Lawrence. Like throughout this novel, he is like reading. Temeraire wants him to read to him. And Lawrence, and he asks for certain things, and Lawrence is like, oh God, like I don't want to read these books, but like Temeraire wants me to read them, so I'm going to read them. So like he's educating himself and educating Temeraire, and also using that as a way to spend time with his, dragon child thing. So I did really enjoy that. I will say, like as a kid who grew up very shy and weird, I read a lot, and one of the things I used to do was I would get up like extra early in the mornings, because apparently when I was like in elementary and middle school I was a morning person. Don't know what happened there, but I would get up extra early in the mornings and to have like an extra half hour to read, and my dog would sit on the couch with me, so I would just read out loud. Like I know the dog can't understand me or anything, I know that the dog's not learning anything, but like the dog would sit on the couch with me with her head in my lap, and I would just read out loud to my dog. So I that kind of brought back some like young, weird, nerdy Tara memories. But yeah, so I did really like that aspect of their relationship, that Lawrence kind of goes out of his, maybe comfort zone isn't the right word, but out of his enjoyment zone to make sure that Temeraire is getting what he wants and needs. Maybe even more so than what Lawrence wants or needs. Like I'm sure there are other books Lawrence would rather read, but Temeraire wants to hear about mathematics, so damn it, he's reading about mathematics.
I think the most relatable Lawrence ever was when he was like, I don't get this math. I don't get this physics, but like, I guess I'm gonna read it to my son, my dragon son. And yes, I also absolutely agree with you, Nick, in that I very much read it as like parental affection. And like, he was calling him my dear, like, and I was sort of like picturing him carrying around like a little toddler and just being like, yes, my dear, I'll read you your book on physics. Like, will you get it? Why are you smarter than me?
That was the point where I loved the relationship the most, was when Temeraire was actually like explaining the things to Lawrence, because Temeraire figured it out, and he was like, "Oh, this is how it works." But
my other favorite point was when Temeraire meets like the French like Choiseul and his dragon, and he just like straight up starts talking French, and Lawrence is standing there like, "You speak French?" And Temeraire's like, "Yeah."
Who doesn't speak French?
And I think that's actually a very important thing to note, is that the reason Temeraire speaks French is because dragons learn language through the egg. So he was on this French vessel for months. We don't really know how long, but it was many months. So he was hearing the French through the egg, and then he only heard English for the last like a week, 2 weeks?
It was 2 weeks, I think.
Okay, so like the last couple weeks, and so this dragon, it's like, it's almost more believable that he knows French than that he knows English. But it's really, I thought that was a really cool, and it makes me wonder. So would that be the case for all dragons? You know what I mean? Like because as we saw in this book,
not Volleys. Volleys seem to barely grasp English in the time that Volleys had. A good being, but a dumb bean.
Oh, poor Volley. Poor good Volley. Not even poor. No, you know what?
No, he is poor.
He's not poor. No, he's loved. I don't remember his writers.
James, right? James loves him and is like, this is my dumb son, and I love him, and he's dumb, but we love him anyway. And it just,
the thing is, he doesn't ever treat him like he's dumb, though.
Exactly.
He just loves him as is, and it doesn't, because he's the only dragon we see that is kind of that, like, and I don't want to call it dumb. He's like slow. Or not even slow. I don't know what the proper word for it would be. Like he doesn't have this like he doesn't have the level of intelligence that like Lily or Maximus or Temeraire has by any means, but he still can speak and he can make himself understood, and he understands, you know, that like the most basic things that he needs to understand. And yeah, and his writer never once treats him like he is not intelligent. You know, he just loves him. It's sort of like having, and I've been here, a really dumb dog and a really smart dog, and being like, I love you both so much for very different reasons. Like you, I can teach all the tricks and you'll listen to me, and you're just, you know, and you are just a big galump who's happy with his life, and that's good too.
You're just doing your best and you're thriving. Yeah. That was pretty much me whenever Volleys was like on page. I was like, yes, you're doing it, sweetie.
I think I would die if Volley ever dies. Like I would just not, I would just die because he's just too like Levitas was bad enough.
Can we talk about the ultimate betrayal of you, by the way, Tara? Because I was gushing to Tara about how I loved Levitas, and she was already on book 2, and she did not like nothing. No, don't get it.
You wanted her to spoil you?
No, but I would have appreciated a warning that my dragon child was going to die because Rankin's an abusive butt.
Now, to be fair, it wasn't Rankin's fault that he died. Like he died in the line of service. That was, you know,
that wasn't Rankin's fault.
He was so badly injured that there was nothing Rankin could have done to save him. That was made very obvious. And to be honest, I think that if it had been written otherwise, like I just imagine ripping the pages out of the book, you know. Like if he actually somehow
calling up Naomi Novik, like, hey, listen, I'm halfway through Spinning Silver and I'm really enjoying your other book, but also you let this man murder this sweet, sweet dragon child, and how dare you, ma'am?
But the relationship, and this is very much like a kind of, I guess, like a trigger warning for animal abuse, or possibly even like child abuse, considering the relationships they have. Days, the guy that at the beginning who like tried to lie to Temeraire to like steal him from Lawrence is the worst, but like not as worst as Rankin, because he not just, it's not just at the end that, you know, where he almost isn't there, you know, when Levitas is dying or dies, but like it's like the whole rest of it where you just see how Levitas is just stuck in his harness and he's dirty and he's like uncomfortable and he's not cared for at all, because each dragon is its own crew's and rider's responsibility. And it's like, I guess Levitas doesn't have a crew like the rest of them have, like Temeraire and Maximus.
He's small. Yeah,
because he's small and he's a messenger dragon. But like, and all of this is because Rankin is pissed that he got a messenger dragon and not, I guess, a better dragon.
No, like, actually,
but I don't. Would he have treated it better anyway?
The way I read this is that Rankin was, you know, son of an aviator, destined to be like Celeritas's rider once his father died.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
So the reason Rankin turned out the way he did, though, is because instead of raising him as an aviator, Celeritas, his dad, let his mother raise him. And his mother was the one who gave him like the normal society views of like, oh, why do you care so much about this dragon? It's bullshit. Your dad should love me more. Which I'm suspecting is what we're getting, like, you know, jealous wife vibes, because dad cares about immortal dragon more than he cares about wife, which is probably also true because marriage is of convenience in the Regency. So what
I'm pretty sure I've loved my pets more than I've loved most of my significant others. So,
but basically what I'm suspecting happens, though, is that Rankin just doesn't believe in the aviator way of caring for dragons because of the way his mother raised him. So he genuinely believes that they don't need that attention and that humans are like spoiling them or coddling them or whatever. And he is neglectful because his mother told him that that's what he has to be. And I think once Celeritas realized that that is the attitude that Rankin had towards dragons, he got rid of him because he's like, I can't have a rider who treats me like this. Like, I'm a motherfucking king. And then, unfortunately, little Levitas ended up with him because they couldn't get rid of him completely. And without anybody to stop Rankin from being an absolute buttface, he continued to be an absolute buttface. So I think it wasn't spite-filled, but it doesn't matter because he was still abusive. Or rather, he was neglectful.
Yeah, those are good points. I actually saw the whole thing a bit differently in that I thought of Rankin as the typical English, obnoxious, colonial looking down on the natives of the colonies that they've taken over, while the rest of the aviators were much more enlightened about, these are our equals, not our subjects. But I mean, that's how I sort of saw it.
Also makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a lot to it there. I imagine that some of it also was Rankin just being pissed that he got shunted by Celeritas, and stuck with this messenger dragon instead. But
I mean, I do agree that probably part of his was in that, but I think that he probably was always like that because Celeritas does mention that he couldn't deal with him.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it was that made him just be like, oh, hell no. Except the way that he actively currently is. Although, sorry, the whole reason I brought this up is because I wanted to say something about Days, or the guy who lies to Temeraire and says that, Lawrence is dead. Because I did want to defend him a little bit, because yeah, he's an absolute dirtbag from Lawrence's point of view, but I think, Reyes is an aviator. I think he really thought he was doing the right thing. I think he super went in here and he was like, this man is bad for this dragon. This dragon needs somebody who knows what's going on, who's going to take care of him correctly, who's not going to be from the bourgeoisie and won't respect dragons. And I think this guy truly went in there and he's like, yes, I have to lie to this dragon, but it is to make sure he can have a better life. And I think it was very much malicious to Lawrence, but it's in Temeraire's best interest in his head. He was still wrong, but I don't think he's the worst. Rankin is by far outweighing the ranking on everyone else.
Just his name, Rankin. I mean, I could see that with the Days. I also, I mean, and I think maybe Granby is a good, he's a good example of, because he didn't like Lawrence either, and I think, part of it was because his friend got, turned down or whatever, but he also, he's an outsider. They all are kind of about him at first. And Lawrence really doesn't help things. Now he doesn't know any better, but he really only befriends Rankin because he's like, oh, he is also a gentleman.
Yes. He has manners, the utmost importance in determining the value of a man. I think that was the reason I hated Lawrence the most, because he was so flexible on everything else. He adapted to everything else pretty quickly and was like, you know what? Dragons talk and are intelligent? All right, cool. I have a dragon child? All right, cool. Surrounded by women in breeches? All right, cool. But manners make it man. And I was like, no, man. Stop treating people terrible because they don't know how to fold a napkin. Calm thine titties.
Calm thine titties.
I hate the construct of manners in the way that bougie society tries to use it as a way to excuse looking down on people who don't have as much as they do. And Lawrence embodied that in the worst sort of way, because he was just like, yes, this man cannot call me sir, therefore he is not a man, goodbye. It was literally like those vibes of like, you know, just I'm doing a really terrible job of like wording this, but just like anybody who uses like a person's lack of knowing like fancy manners as a way to look down on people is just a very classist thing to me, and it just drives me up a wall, because class is a construct of the rich and manners are a construct of the rich, and they're all doing it to perpetuate their own bullshit, and I'm just like, ugh, rage.
Yeah, I mean, but again, like this being like a Regency era, thing, it's like, of course that has to be part of it. I get that. And I really like Lawrence's relationship with Jane Rowland, for a lot of reasons. Like, because she's just like, yeah, like, they said I needed to have a kid, so I went out and found a dude and I had a kid, and like now my kid's getting raised by other people, because like, that's what she's meant for. She is meant to take over my place when I go with Excidium. And, and she's very like just sure of herself. She doesn't give a crap what anybody thinks, she's sure of herself. She's strong-willed. She does the absolute minimum that she has to do to like fit in with society when it's necessary. And she's still got the scar and everything. And like people look at her weird on the street and she never thinks twice about it. And the fact it felt a little bit odd to me that like she chose like Lawrence of all people to be like her next hookup. And like, also, I feel like this is like, it happened more than once in this book, right?
Twice.
Yeah. In my mind, all I could imagine was that to her, it was a personal challenge. And in her mind, she was just like, I'm gonna make this fancy man drop trowel. Sorry, I just that was the only thing. Like when Jane started pulling her shit, I was like, she just wants to see how far she can push him, and then if she also gets laid, she's gonna be fine with it. And I was like, I respect that for you, girl. Like go for it. Also, I just love how like Lawrence accidentally adopted Emily, like her daughter, and then accidentally also was like, I guess I'm sleeping with your mother now.
It's a very weird, like, sort of not, I don't want to call it like step parent relationship because it's not, but like, he's like, I mean, Emily's part of his crew. That's his family, really,
Also, I love the introduction to Jane where she comes up and she's like, yeah, so kid, does Emily have permission to take some fucking time off? And Lauren is like, ma'am, I'm sorry. it just literally had me in such a like, see, I have so many mixed feelings about this book because like this whole thing has just been me being like, I don't know.
I mean, and I will say, like, I think that you guys are gonna have the second book, especially like out of the three that I've read so far, I liked the second one the best. But there's I think there's going to be a lot about the second book, I think. It's the world just grows so exponentially with each of them. And we were talking earlier about, like historically, like how is everything still the same and everything. And I think one thing that's very important to remember is that, while they have dragons, like I already mentioned, like, well, everybody has dragons and everybody has different kinds of dragons with different strengths. There's also the fact that like technology and like transportation, everything, as we know from the very beginning of this book, is still the same. Like it's still the same sort of ships and everything. They can only, get places so fast. So even though they have dragons, like they can't just fly a dragon around the world because a dragon needs a place to stop if it's flying over water. It can't fly across a desert, for hundreds or maybe thousands of miles without water. Like, so there's still a lot of barriers.
Well, your range is limited, but those dragons can go hundreds of miles. And that to me, that changes all the dynamics about transportation, because you could be putting, instead of having to take
Well,
a
but
slow
think
boat,
of,
a slow boat to Ireland. You can jump on a dragon and be there in
oh yeah, I mean for
20
sure, like
minutes,
England
right?
to Ireland, that's one thing. But like, then you also have to think about the fact that everybody having dragons means that everybody has their own way of like protecting themselves and protecting their borders. So like it's the fact that everything is kind of in the same stasis that it was at that actual time in history I don't think it's unbelievable at all. In fact, I think it's more than believable. And again, mostly because as far as we know, like even China, like they have they have these breeds like Temeraire where he has the roar, and yes, he's very intelligent and he's very fast, but he wouldn't really be much of a match against a giant regal copper if they were just fighting each other. You know what I mean? Like it's very, and then they talk about, we don't see them in this book, but they talk about the fire breathing dragons and everything and how much devastation they can do to like a ship. I just, I think there's a lot of world building that is coming with this series that adds to, that just makes it all like more believable. But even reading this book, never once did I wonder like, well, how and why are they still in this place?
I'm excited for more of the world building, but I'm also like nervous for other reasons because a part of this story is going to be going to China, and this is like set in the Regency, so I know it's going to be very colonialist and like lots of Orientalism, and I'm just bracing myself for hating all of that. So I'm just getting ready to be angry about the treatment of Asia, and if I am pleasantly surprised, I will be happy to be pleasantly surprised. But I'm like bracing for the inevitability.
I certainly don't expect it, but it did cross my mind that as Temeraire was starting to realize that and show a little bit of independence more than he should. And I go, is the end of this series going to be Temeraire takes over the world? And
I mean, I wouldn't be mad if there was more Temeraire and less Lawrence. So
yeah,
I didn't mean take care of the story. I mean, like overthrow England and put dragonkind on top instead of mankind.
Temeraire starts ruling the world. Love it.
Well, I mean, and there's definitely, like you said, that he's definitely overstepping his boundaries a little bit already with his, like him and Lily and Maximus making that agreement, like no matter what, we will protect each other and we will protect our riders. Like,
right.
That's very like, they're not supposed to act like that or think like that. They're not supposed to band together. So Temeraire is in his own way a bit of a revolutionary already. And
oh my god, all of the like conversations where like Lawrence was like quietly hyperventilating because he's like, how do I explain to my dragon that he should be loyal to his country? And I'm like, yeah buddy, how do you explain that to your dragon? Because you fucking shouldn't.
But it's not even a country, he's an immigrant.
I just like this whole time he was like voicing like the whole like, how do I explain to my dragon that he should be a nationalist? And I'm like, you can't, because he fucking shouldn't.
Well, I mean, I just the how difficult it was to explain the idea of like property to him. Like we can't just go killing everybody's cows and sheep type of thing. We need permission. Now
it's right there. I should just be able to eat it.
Yeah. And I can't remember if there was when they were visiting Lawrence's family, did Temeraire eat deer? He did, right? But
yes.
Now I'm wondering, like, and because it has been a bit since I read the first book, so I want to look back and be like, was there something about like, well, we also can't eat the wild animals on people's land because they own those too? Because that's
I mean, but that's why Lawrence went there, because he knew it was his property, and therefore he figured it would be fine.
Well, right. For him, of course, but they like so Temeraire could be told like he can be made to understand that he can't just go kill everybody's cows and sheep because they're domesticated animals and they own them. But like, what about the wild animals? Because like that was illegal too. Like if you owned the land, you owned the wild animals that were on it. And if somebody wanted to kill your wild animals, they needed permission for that.
Yep.
Like people literally got like put to death for like killing the king's deer and shit back in the day. So
I
like
did not know that. Oh my.
Oh, yeah,
Plot
yeah,
point
yeah.
in Robin Hood.
Oh shit! I did know that. I thought
Yeah.
that was just a thing in stories. I thought that was
no.
for stories. Oh man.
Yeah.
You know.
They like the lands that were owned by the crown and by lords and stuff, like those were their wild animals. And if you went onto their property and killed a wild animal, you were a criminal. So like it's like, so you can maybe explain away to Temeraire, you know, that you can't kill people's herds, they're domesticated animals, but how you explain like that they also somehow own the wild animals just because they own the land that they live on, especially when those wild animals aren't stuck on that land, they can wander onto other land. You know what I mean? So like you could go after a wild animal on public land and then it like crosses a boundary that you don't know and kill
I feel
it.
like that's the point where you just don't explain animal domestication to him. You just are like,
yeah, you just say you can't kill any animal.
it's just like, don't kill it unless I give it to you, please.
And
My
then
sweet-
Temeraire starts singing "Colors of the Wind" from Pocahontas.
Oh man.
So we talked a lot or a little, we talked earlier about like one of the things that I had mentioned about the end of the book, well, Nami specifically did, where, you know, Lawrence looks back on his, you know, relationship with Edith and yeah, that I included the passage where he actually looks back on it in our notes because I really did. Well, I don't like that she ended up with, what was it, Wolvie, I think is his name, and this is this guy who he's there when Lawrence goes to his parents' house for dinner, and this guy's kind of awful, you know, and it's like, oh, Edith, like you actually seem like a pretty chill person, like why you ended up with this jerk? But you know, other than that, like the fact that he, you know, recognizes that like he couldn't give her what she wanted and he's glad to see her happy was like, you know, that and his relationship with Temeraire were, you know, the redeeming points of Lawrence for me. Now, one of the things before we close, one of the things that was mentioned on Reddit was the number of tropes in these books as a whole, but this book also like just particularly. So I looked it up and wow, yes, there's a lot. I would never, ever go through all of them. And honestly, I think at this point, it would be hard for me to weed out like the, you know, ones that are specific to just His Majesty's Dragon. But, you know, just a few examples are a boy and his ex, in this case, a boy and his dragon, action girl and action mom, Emily and Jane. Oh God. Yeah, this one killed me. A date with Rosie Palms. In this book, Lawrence pets, and I put this in our notes because I was like, ugh, about it. Because I also was the one that was like, I wasn't thinking about the my dear thing in a sexual way until Lawrence petted Temeraire's like facial tendrils and then realized that they were like an erogenous zone. Like, and apparently that's a trope called a date with Rosie Palms, which I know a lot of tropes. I'd never heard of that one, and wow.
I personally found it absolutely hilarious because like logically it makes sense. Why would you think weird face tendrils would be sexual? But also it was just really, really funny to me because Lawrence is like visceral, like, oh shit, what have I done? And Temeraire just being like, oh, it's nice, I like that. And Lawrence being like, no, it was hilarious. I just thought it was really funny.
Well, again, it's like a pet or even a child like discovering something sexual and you're like, oh geez, I did not mean to get you all. No.
Yeah.
Did not want to start this conversation, but we're here now and I'm running away.
Exactly. I can't and I won't.
Well, and then just, I don't want to, and really like, I didn't want to read too far into these tropes because I was kind of skimming them and I was like already a little bit like, oh, I don't want to get spoiled for stuff. There's things I don't know about here. Alien blood, dragon blood is near black. So that's and they also share that with other animals in the series that will come up later. But like, so that's a trope. And then the one I wanted to close with is just generally alternate history, which, you know, the
Wait, this is
presence.
alternate? I thought this was real. This is
Yeah.
shit.
But their presence comes in as a kind of like fictional fix to certain things. So I didn't want to get too deep into that because the trope I was kind of skimming definitely mentioned stuff from future books. But obviously this is alternate history and fantasy, I would say are the you know, two, you know, major categories these books are in. And as a history major, like I feel like I set out to enjoy this book more than I did. But again, I will say that the next two have hooked my interest a little bit more. Like the only reason I'm putting off reading them is because we are splitting our season 2 up where we're doing 3 Temeraires and then the Broken Earth trilogy. So I otherwise I would have continued, just kept reading forward. So they do definitely pick up quite a bit, especially with the second book. So I don't know, any like last thoughts or whatever on His Majesty's Dragon before we close for the evening?
I was pleasantly surprised because this book really pushed me out of my comfort zone. Like I said, it would have just stayed on my bookshelf for centuries otherwise. And while I do have a lot of mixed feelings about it, there were a lot of things that I ended up really liking. And I have now found myself very intrigued on learning about the history of dragon breeding in this world. Like, let's be absolutely real. I am now reading this as an intrigued biologist and a concerned parent for Temeraire. Like,
oh, just you wait. Just you wait.
Jesus shit. What is my son going to do?
I mean, I don't know if it comments so much on this but the trope of using the British Admiralty for science fiction and fantasy book, I think, is quite common, as opposed to other militaries or eras. You know, you have Hunter Harrington, you have Commodore John Grimes novels, you have the Walter Williams books. They all use that same trope, so seems like it's fairly common in science fiction and fantasy.
We got
and that also could be because they're the ones that keep the best records of how they run things.
That could be, actually.
The British are historians.
I see how we have our like resident like history and like how war works experts here. Meanwhile, I'm just flailing in the corner going, biology.
So you can explain the Black Dragon blood and what it's based on then?
Yes. They probably don't have iron in there.
All right, Nick, any last thoughts?
No, I'm just I'm looking forward to getting into the second book and learning a little bit more about this world. Yeah,
the second book, I know I keep saying this, but it's I liked this one, but the second book is what really hooked me. So like for anybody who maybe hasn't read farther in the series, if by some chance you're watching or listening to this, I do suggest, like, if you were kind of on the fence after this book, I really do suggest at least trying the second book. All right. Well, on that note, once again, I'm Tara, along with Nick, Jonathan, and Nami. Thank you for joining us for Sagas and Sass, the first episode of what is technically season 2 for us. And we will see you next time. That'll be 2 weeks from now, where we'll be talking about Throne of Jade, the second book in the Temeraire series. I had to look. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.